So I guess I'll get started. And then, again, there's like 5 of us in here, so it's kind of intimate. So I'm going to go over some stuff. Stop me anytime, ask questions, because I'm not going to take the 57 minutes that we have to go through the presentation. But I would like to pray before I get started. Lord Jesus, I just thank you for this conference, Lord, this facility, the place that you brought us to spend time together, and to learn, to minister to each other, and just for some of us maybe rest, whatever it might be, Lord. We thank you for bringing us here. We thank you for your plans and not ours. And I just ask that whatever purpose you have for this next few minutes, that you just have your way, that everybody's heart's open, their minds are open, their eyes are open, and kind of like Dr. Blackley said this morning, that we have open eyes, open hearts, open ears, so that we can see your kingdom. And that's in your name we pray. Amen. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Andrew Eason. I'm the Wounded Healers Program Director for City Vision University. I got to City Vision University by way of just following the Lord after 25 years of addiction. So I struggled with drugs and alcohol. I started drinking at the age of 12. Things started getting bad around 18. They got really bad around 20. And then I ran for another 22 years.
What did you do next 22 years?
I ran. I ran from place to place.
Okay.
I ran from the Lord. I ran from consequences. I ran from struggle. I ran from difficulty. If it got hard, I just quit and started over somewhere else. Pretty typical addiction story. But in 2017, I got a DUI. I hadn't been in trouble in law in almost 20 years or 15 years. And my wife at the time sent me divorce papers and an application to a recovery program in jail. And I had to fill out both of them for her to come get me. So I did. And then she let me stay at the house until I entered a residential program. We got divorced about 4 months in. As I finished the program, I was a captain by trade. At that point, I was like, I can't go back to anything, my old life. I just don't know what I'm doing. I was 42 years old. So decided to stay with St. Matthew's House. It's in Southwest Florida. I came to City Vision and got a bachelor's in addiction counseling. And then I got my MBA in early spring 2021 from City Vision. My wife and I, it's a longer story than we're going to spend time on, but we got remarried in November of that year. So we just celebrated 5 years remarried this last June. A lot of wonderful stories there. So I ended up the director of the residential program at St. Matt's on the men's side. 2023, Thanksgiving, the Lord told us to sell everything that we had and move back to North Alabama where my family is. So we did that. I'm at that point about 25% through with a master's in social work at Walden University. So I moved to Alabama with like no job, I didn't know what the Lord had. 2 months later, email from City Vision saying, hey, we're starting this Wounded Healers program. Or do you know anybody that might want to be the director? And I'm like, yeah, I know a guy. So that's what the Lord did. Finished my master's in social work this last August. Got my license as a master's social worker and started our doctorate program this last March. So I'm in the first term of our doctorate, which is an organizational leadership doctorate. If we have some time, I might show it to you on the website if anybody wants to have a look at it. We've got a few different concentrations in it. My focus is on addiction. So I got a grad certificate in addiction and a bachelor's degree in addiction counseling. So along with my
a lifetime of
practical
practical experience.
experience. So, for those of us who like minister to people in addiction, one of the things that I learned, not at 1 year sober, but like maybe 2 or 3 years sober, is that the Lord had given me every single experience that I ever needed to be a mature 42-year-old man. I just hadn't learned any of it. So entering into recovery, being willing to look at the things that the Spirit wanted to show me, to be humble and to follow the direction of staff and mentors and everybody around me, meant I had to go back and review a bunch of that stuff. And as I reviewed it, I learned the lessons that I didn't learn the first time. So going through that process, I became a lot more mature without having to experience things all over again. That was a beautiful thing for me because it also, in that process, I found healing and forgiveness and redemption and so many other things that I wouldn't have found if I wouldn't have been willing to look back and let God kind of clean up the wreckage of my past. So when I started using the term wounded healer probably in 2019 or 2020, I didn't know it was a a Henry Nouwen quote. If you don't know the quote, it's kind of like we're all wounded people, whether spiritually, emotionally, physically, or mentally. We've all experienced wounds. The question isn't how can we hide our wounds, but how can they be put into the service of God? So when our wounds cease to be a source of shame and become a source of healing, we become wounded healers. So it's a pretty good example of what Rick Warren would say we all kind of need. Like, we're all pretty much wounded. And my wife today is an example of that. She's the best example I have, because the things that we went through in my addiction, she had to divorce me, and now we're not really reunited. We're united again for the first time underneath Christ and with Him. Is that if she sees somebody that's struggling today, whether it's addiction or whatever it might be, and she's been a high school teacher, engineering and robotics. She's not she doesn't work in the social field, but if she sees somebody, she starts telling them our story or my story. So even the wounds that she experienced inside of my addiction, she doesn't have an addiction and never has, that she still gets to minister and share that without embarrassment, without shame. And that's been a really big deal as far as our restoration. So we started at City Vision. We developed the Wounded Healers program. I talked about this at GRMF last year, to start capturing people coming out of residential recovery programs that wanted to go back into, or they felt called to the ministry, or they wanted an education, or they wanted a leg up in whatever their trade was, or their skill was, or whatever it might be. So we have these undergraduate certificates. We'll look at those a little bit today. But we've been adding undergraduate certificates over time. So recently we added a recovery coaching one, a facilities management one, and those tend to capture more people. Even the ones that are going to go back out into, like facilities management is good for people that do HVAC or plumbing, or if they're a carpenter, or if they're an electrician, because they become pretty useful to the ministry, because every one of you has a maintenance division, right, and operations, and sometimes if you contract those things out, they get expensive, they get sometimes abusive as far as the bills, and they require a lot of accountability. So having some internal tracks for those things, again, anything that keeps somebody around longer. So there ends up being a trade-off. I think most people have probably heard before, like, once you finish the program, if a ministry, some ministries don't hire them for a year extra or whatever it might be, but some of them will take on program graduates as staff, but there's a lot of giving back, because they usually don't make, right? They don't have the education, they don't have the training, there's a lot of risk in it. But at some point, there's a trade-off, right, to where they actually become, in that professional development, in that funnel of growing inside the organization as a case manager, or even, in development or other departments. How do you get them trained, and how do you keep them going? So we have certificates for that. We have associates, and bachelor's, and master's degrees for those things. But in the aftercare department, so this is kind of what we're going to talk about. We've done some research on aftercare programs. We have a best practice model of Hope Gospel Mission in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And then we have the Wounded Healers program that City Vision has as a partnership program model. So it's kind of the neat thing about the Wounded Healers program is 75 to 90% of the students that you would send us are going to qualify for Pell Grants. So there's not going to be a budget issue there. Right? So they're going to get life skills training, they're going to get case management training, or addiction counseling, or nonprofit management, or business administration, or Christian ministry and leadership training that's going to be beneficial for them in their life, and it's also going to benefit the organization, and it's not going to cost any money. Eventually, I went through a program at St. Matthew's House. When I finished the program, we had no peer specialists, right? So nobody that was qualified or credentialed as peers. We had one director. He was a shelter director that was a certified addiction counselor, and these are all still faith-based stuff. When I left in early 2024, we had 23 peer specialists on staff, and all the directors except for one had a counseling certificate, right? Still, everybody that got those things got them through City Vision as a faith-based organization. So they didn't get them in secular training or anything else. They got them through the faith-based orientation of City Vision. So this is how we design the network. I don't want to get into too busy a slide, but our sources of innovation, and how do we get to a best practice model, and how do we gather all of this information in so that I can stand up here today and say, these are good models, and these are some of the things you can do. And it's not like we're not saying like what we're doing isn't working. One of the things that we noticed, like 600 plus partner meetings. So partnership organizations that send us students that we're trying to develop a relationship with. We've had partnership meetings with 600 plus of them, or 600 plus partner meetings with a group of them, a large group, trying to get the words right, about what they do, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, where they're struggling, and where they can help. So that collaboration has also led to 500 plus students, some advisory councils, and documents for the toolkits. So the research, we've gone through textbooks, articles, workshops, associations, curriculum, vendors, client and staff training. So what is, like, if we were to ask you, hey, will you send us what you do for your entry-level program staff training? Like, how do you train them in documentation? How do you train them in case management? How do you, what does your HR department do as far as your vision, values, and mission? So we get all those together, and you can put them in a document, like in Notebook LM. Like, we can put Sunday Breakfast Mission, Durham's, and St. Matthew's House, and Springs Rescue, all of them in a document that's a box, like it's an AI box. So the AI won't go outside of that box. And we take Notebook LM and we say, hey, look at all these and tell us what everybody has in common, and tell us what everybody doesn't have in common. So you can start developing, oh, this works good for all of them, right? So you have this massive amount of information that we compile, put it inside a box, and then it comes back out. So we have experts. So there's faculty at City Vision University. Some of us are experiential experts. I teach the Wounded Healers course. I'm the lead professor there, but there's usually 2 or 3 other professors in the course with me. Like, I have 2 master's degrees. They've all got doctorates, and they're still teaching the same bachelor's level course, but they've got advanced degrees. They're usually practitioners in the field, and most of the time they work at a rescue mission, or they have a prison ministry, or they work at some form of faith-based counseling organization. So we've got program directors from rescue missions, subject matter experts, guest speakers, and obviously we use the AI tool. So we're trying to funnel all of that information into our partners. And everybody at GRMF is our partners, whether you send students or not. Like, we're, City Vision, if you don't know much about us, we're a nonprofit university. So we've got 12 full-time staff, and then a bunch of adjunct faculty. Though our budget's around, $1.3 million. So we don't make much money. That's not the goal. The goal is to diffuse innovation and diffuse education so that we can actually solve problems in Jesus' name. So the toolkits on the bottom right, there will be some slides. So if you have your phone, there's going to be some QR codes, and then there'll be some websites. And if you'll stop by, even if it's not during dessert, if you'll go by our booth and put your name on our little sign-in board, I'll send you an email that'll have direct links to the toolkits and everything else. Because it's on our website. Sometimes it's a massive, the information has a ton of, or the website has a ton of information. So if we can get you to the website, to the links, then you can see a lot of our toolkits, and you'll see them on the slides, but you can't link them obviously here. So we met with hundreds of missions to learn their aftercare models, taking notes on the best practice, and we've developed a research project on aftercare models. That's what I was talking about, and assembled the best practices and documented templates into a toolkit. So there's a toolkit for aftercare, there's a toolkit for food service, there's a toolkit for development. We'll show you some of them in a little bit. So if you wanted to take a picture of that QR code, you go right ahead, but inside the toolkit, this is, if you had the website open, you'd see the aftercare and relapse prevention toolkit, and then the Hope Gospel Mission, which is specific for Hope Gospel Mission. And then there's the Recovery Home one, there's secular models, Spring Rescue Mission, St. Matthew's House where I went. We'll talk about the model that St. Matthew's House is using now, because it's kind of come into place since we developed this slideshow, but we'll talk about that in a little bit if we have time. So the types of aftercare services that we researched were by level of intensity. So structured programs that had up to 2 years stay, like inside a program and internship. So moderate intensity with regular check-ins, and then low intensity. Aftercare services that had alumni meetings and community training, some that had relief services, some that just did groups, and some that have case management and or counseling, transitional living and support sober living homes, some of them that are provided by the mission or provided by partners of the mission, some of them that are short-term, some of them that are long-term. Again, if you have transitional living and sober living environments around your mission and they're not partnered with your mission, this is just my personal experience, I need to start making that clear, and they're not partnered with your mission, their vision, you might not be strategically aligned, right? And if you're not strategically aligned, your clients are not liable to get the kind of service from them that you want. And that's when you see something, well, don't go to that halfway house, right? It's just like, well, if you can get kind of strategically aligned with them, things help. But as a rescue mission, again, this is Andrew's opinion, like we have to lead the way. I remember this at St. Matt's with our partners, with churches and the other things, like the government agencies and a lot of the local churches are not going to lead the way because we're rescuing people. I mean, that's why we're rescue missions. So we lead the way in developing those voices. So as a program director, if I've got guys that are discharged from my program and going to this halfway house, I'm going to go to that halfway house and have a talk with them. Like, hey, how can I want your halfway house to be full, and I also want them all to be sober. So if you want me to send people your way, how are we going to help them stay sober? Right? If you need drug UAs from me and I can get them cheaper, like I'll give you a discount, whatever it is that you need, if I can provide it, I'm going to. Because they're not going to come to me asking for that. They're going to come to me asking for more people, because the ones that are there are getting high or drunk and leaving. So we have to find a way to lead the way. The reason that they're a halfway house and not a rescue mission is because they don't have either whatever it is that God's given us at this point. So I want to be able to share that as much as I can. So internships, apprentices, and vocational training. So what do you offer your residents when it comes time to transition? How long is that transition? How long can they stay if they're working with the mission or if they have a full-time job? You know, what housing options do you have for them? And then funding and staffing. So primarily staff-led aftercare programs with a significant budget. Anybody have one of those? There's not a lot of aftercare programs with a significant budget, but a lot of them are peer-driven using alumni volunteers. So how do you find a middle ground there? So the factors that reduce relapse rates. So we've measured success rate of recovery program graduates that remain sober for 1 year after graduation. That involves several thousand graduates. The key factors. One of the things that we talk about, it's like a three-legged stool: job, housing, and a support network. So if they've left the program, even if they're on property, if they don't have that three-legged stool, job, housing, and when I say housing, it can't be free, right? They need to be contributing to something because that builds responsibility. So they need to have a job that they're earning and performing well in, not a job given to them by, I mean, it can be a program job, but they have to be performing. They need to have housing, and they need to be engaged on their own, right, intentionally with supportive church or recovery community. If they have all three of those, a year after program, 80% chance of being sober. If they don't have any of those, 10% chance. So how do we, I think we were talking about it before I started, but maybe for the camera, is you finish, everybody does a really good job. If people complete your program, they're going to be sober. So if it's a year-long program or a 10-month program or a 9 or 6, at 6 months they're sober. That doesn't mean they win, right? The chances of someone relapsing after a year-long program, if they're set free, are 80%. It doesn't drop below 15% until they're 3 years sober. So how do we get them to that 3-year mark? And if you've invested $40,000 to $60,000 in someone's year-long program, you don't want that money to go to waste. So how do you protect that investment for the next 6 to 9 months or maybe 18 more months? So some of the questions that we would ask, so as we go through the rest of the presentation, what's your interest in aftercare program, and what are your biggest challenges in running more effective aftercare programs, or what are your biggest challenges in making your aftercare programs better? And sometimes you're like, well, we don't really have one. So then how do you either create one, or how do you make the transitional part of your program safer? Because transition is, there's a few barriers. This is part of my doctorate, is how do we make all the programs more effective. The barriers that happen, right, some of them are in the intake, right? So we don't allow this, we don't allow this, we don't allow this. So we exclude these people, and some of them we know we have to exclude. You know, medically assisted treatment, maybe abstinence-based, you know, is it nicotine, whatever it might be. Then there's this internal culture of the program. So is it a prison mentality? You know, is it, have we allowed too many, you know, from the vision of the program, from the director to the case managers to the entry-level program staff or the peer leaders, what's the culture of the program, right? Is it like a high school, or is it like, right, is it a ministry, right? Are people loving each other? Are they learning how to grow in love and some of those things? And then transitional periods. So transitioning, if you have different phases, so the transitional phases from one phase to the next, and then from that final phase into working or back into a normal social environment. Because you go from a male-dominated social environment here, as much love as there can be into it, into a societal environment, even even at a thrift store for a rescue mission or a kitchen at a rescue mission, and you throw in just the opposite sex, right? Brains are going to go woohoo, right? And it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the physical act of sex. It's just that's not a social stimulus they've had in a period of time. How do they deal with it? So we don't teach them how to deal with that, give them practice inside it, and allow them to make mistakes. I can't have, this is me again, I can't have the same rules in month 12 of the program that I had in month 6, right? Because they're not going to be experiencing the same temptations. Do I expect them to have gotten stronger? Yes, but they haven't practiced. And I want people to be able to fall, get back up, and continue the race. Instead, I put them back or I kick them out. There's a lot of difficult things to do in there. So those are some of the questions that we ask. So we're going to go through the Hope Gospel Mission. They have some pretty neat programs. Some of them are outside of the box. Chris Hedlund's the program officer, manager up there, director, and has some great stuff. So they increased the 2002 study revealed that 71% of individuals who engaged in aftercare programs remained sober for at least one more year, compared to only 41% of those who did not participate. So research indicates that aftercare programs significantly improve the chance of long-term recovery for people who have completed programs by bridging the gap between structured treatment and real-world challenges. That's what we were just talking about. How do I go from the structure to how do I face temptation, succeed sometimes, fail sometimes, because we've all got a weak spot, right? There's going to be an area where I fail in. If I don't fail in going out there and getting high, or I don't fail in dating the first girl that I'm going to see, I might fail in whatever comes on my phone and I get hooked on in the middle of the night. And it might be porn, it might not be. It might just be social media, and then 2 weeks later I'm too exhausted to work and I'm not performing, and now I feel overwhelmed and I'm stressed, and then I go to one of the other two. Like, the devil doesn't care how he gets me there or how long it takes. And that's, so how do we provide people the freedom to do that? We had a rule, there were like no smartphones. Even in transitional track, they could have flip phones, but they couldn't have smartphones. How do you prevent them from having smartphones? I mean, at some point, I became the director, and I'm like, what? We can't. They're walking around with flip phones, like, and underneath their bed, they got 6 iPhones, right? And they just pass them down as people transition out. So there's phones all over the place. So it's like, okay, let's stop. You can have whatever phone you want. But while we're doing case management and while you're in transitional track, and as long as you stay on property, we're going to put Covenant Eyes on your phone, right?
What was the last thing you said?
Covenant Eyes.
What is that?
So Covenant Eyes is an app, right? So it tracks all the websites that your phone goes to and reports it to somebody else. So it'll screenshot any explicit, anything that it thinks is not good, and it'll send it to your accountability. So you get them to sign a waiver, to have them put, right? Now, does that mean that they can't still have another? Yeah, we can't stop them from, but it makes us less the bad guy when they have an option and they have to choose to do bad instead of we're kind of pushing them towards the sin, right? And reduce risk of relapse. So studies shown that participation in aftercare programs is associated with a decreased risk of relapse. Ongoing support and resources helps individuals address triggers and stressors that may lead to substance abuse. The big words in there are triggers and stressors, right? So a normal amount of stress is healthy for people, right? But this is my brain, this is my social work side. At some point, stress gets up to here, and the next step is not stress anymore, it's threat, right? It goes from stress to threat. When my brain believes I'm threatened, and that could just be a camel, like straws in camel's back. It could just be the last straw, and my brain goes from stress to threat. When my brain goes from stress to threat, it kicks into survival mode. When it kicks into survival mode and I don't have the practice coping mechanisms to stay safe, I'm going to do what I've always done to stay safe, and that's get high, get drunk, run, do something else. So I'm going to end up outside of the environment that got me safe because of a threat-based decision. So how do we teach them how to manage that? And it's relationships. So that's why the alumni participation in the alumni programs are usually groups, because it helps us deal with stress and threat and triggers. To maximize the effectiveness of programs, they should include continued therapy, support systems, sober living environments, relapse prevention planning, and life skills training. Again, programs do a phenomenal job of teaching all of these things. Like we all put these tools in their pockets, and if they're not in their pockets, they're in the bookshelf, right? So if they've worked all the 12 steps, they probably got them in a box somewhere in a notebook, or they've got their Celebrate Recovery book or their Genesis Process book. They got their Bible highlighted with all of these things. But have they gone through them enough and applied them in life that they're in their heart and they're in their mind? Because until, like, I use a term called, there's a difference between knowing and believing, right? I can know something because I learned it in my Bible or on a piece of paper, right? But until I apply it in life and I see that it's actually true, I may not necessarily believe it. So somebody can tell me, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. And I'm like, it ain't never worked before, right? So then I actually learn how to do it and he flees and I'm like, oh my goodness, this works, right? So now I can take another step into freedom. And that's the key, is having the time to reach a certain level of freedom so that I'm safe enough sometimes on my own. Because the goal for all of us, like for me as a man, was to hopefully be restored with my wife and my family and to be a leader, right, that people relied on and trusted. But that just didn't happen overnight, and it didn't come in 12 months and then it just set me free. I don't know what I would have done. So Hope Gospel Mission, they do 3 different programs. There's a post-program connection, an alumni group, and a discipleship transition program. So the transition program will be like your internship. The other 2, the post-program connection and the alumni group, the alumni group's available to everybody. So the post-program connection is they get a cash reward, $3,000 paid over 12 months. So let me kind of explain how it works. This person is someone that decides after program that they're going to leave. Right? They're going to go back home. They're going to get a job. They had a good career or they made a lot of money. That's what they're going to do. But the agreement is, if you'll allow our chaplain or our case manager to come to your home once a month, right, we're going to give you $250 a month. Every time that we come to your house, we're going to give you $250. Right? So every month you go to their house and you see their house, you observe their environment. It's like in-home care and mental health, right? So you see their environment, you see how they're living, right? You talk to them, you meet with them for an hour. If people complete that year, right, if you're going to let your case manager come to your house once a month for a year, you're going to have to be pretty skilled to be getting high during that, right? And $3,000 is not a lot of money to do that. So it's an investment, but it's very supportive. And if something happens to them along the way, remember, you're 29 days away from catching them if they relapse the minute you walk out the door. Right? That's a lot better than a month or 90 days. Right? So you can catch things before they go to jail, or before they overdose, or before they end up in the hospital. So for programs that have the budget for it, it's a pretty good deal. The alumni group is all graduating residents are encouraged to participate in this level of aftercare. So they have monthly gatherings. So even that first group, right, they're going to be encouraged to go to these monthly gatherings. They come to the mission kitchen or the restaurant, or they meet at a bowling alley or Top Golf or whatever it might be once a month. And a lot of times some of you have these tiers of graduates. Like we've got these graduates at St. Matthew's House that graduated 12 years ago, and some of them own roofing companies. So once a month they'll sponsor something, right? It's usually you can find stuff like that, or you can come up with things that are not expensive. So the alumni guys get together. They do an ugly sweater contest for Christmas, or so they get together and they meet and they socialize. And it's we'll talk about it in a little bit, but it's part of William White wrote a paper about transformational change, and it's that introduction and participation in a community of shared experience, because then they get to be surrounded by people. Like I'm either surrounded. If I just walk out into the grocery store, right, there are people in the grocery store that drink, that aren't Christians, that are Christians. Like I'm not necessarily in a community that has my experience. I go to church, right, and there are some people from Living Free and some recovery programs that go to the same church as me. But for the majority of the part, I'm surrounded by Christians, but are they practicing Christianity at my recovery level, right? Because I need that kind of support. I need that kind of accountability. So being around people that are like-minded and like experiences reinforces my recovery. So this provides a peer group that has something significant in common, right, which is completing a recovery program. So the chaplaincy encourages connection and facilitates some of the meetings and some of the dinners and stuff like that. They encourage to celebrate recovery, recreational events. The one at St. Matthew's House, we have an alumni director now, but she's a clinical social worker, so she makes most of the money over here in the clinical social work side, but she's the alumni director. Most of what she does is facilitate events and retreats and stuff like that. And the majority of them, like they'll run a 5K once a month. Right? I mean, it's three miles. So a lot of people can run, and they do it because the ones that don't want to run, they'll stand there and hold water or take pictures and do other stuff. And then they'll go kayaking, or they do Southwest Florida, right? So they go play with alligators and do Florida stuff, right? But it's they developed this bond. So, you know, there are guys that are in the alumni group. I see the pictures, you know, weekly or monthly, and I'm like, that guy relapsed. Like, he went through the program 3 times and relapsed every time until he started participating in this. And now he's healthy and happy, and like he's calling me going from the church that I used to go to, and it's some amazing stuff. And then they're level 3. So this is like an internship program. So all graduates are offered this. So it's on-site programming. So it's the most comprehensive. So they're on-site. So plenty of accountability. Like we had, again, if you have that part of your program where people get to stay after program, right? They still get case management. They get probably a random UA at least once a month. They breathalyze weekly or nightly, whatever it might be. It's something like this, except for they also participate in kind of intense case management, and they also act as peer support and leadership. So it's like an entry-level internship job at St. Matt's. For the first 6 months of that, they work 25 hours a week, and then the second 6 months they'll work 40. So these people get charged because they have jobs. They get paid by the ministry or someone else. They get charged $600 per month of program fees, not rent, but program fees. This includes all housing-related expenses, but not personal expenses. They still get to eat meals, and it incentivizes them staying longer in a healthy environment. When they finish 12 months, they get half of that back, right? So if they stay there long enough, we had something similar at St. Matt's, but it was just like discounted rent, especially if you decided to be an RA. So if you would drive people to, like you might not have anything to do with ministry, you're over here, you're working on a delivery truck. But at night, you would drive one of the vans to recovery meetings or to church. You'd provide accountability, or you'd volunteer at night to help with the breathalyzers, you know, and you'd be a pillar of, you get this money dropped off of your rent every month, so you wouldn't have to, or your program fee every month. I know a guy that he stayed 3 years and he had $40,000 in the bank to go put a down payment on a home, because he could. Now, to do that, you also need some life skills courses about what to do with your money. But between the program awards and the financial savings at Hope Gospel, they've had people leave their program and purchase their own home. So not pay for it, obviously cash, but be able to have the deposit or something down to do that. I heard a story, I don't remember what program it was from, but the individual, I'm trying to remember the program, they finished the program and they went out with the staff to go look at apartments. And so they took them to these apartments and they're like, hey, here's your apartment. And the lady looked at him and says, like, I'm not living here. You need to find me somewhere nicer, right? And that struck the program director that went out there with him, because most of the time as addicts coming out of something like that, we will settle for, right? I'm looking for 4 walls and somewhere away from the mission. And they're like, no, I want something nicer. I want something nicer for me. I want something nicer for